This story was written by Redditor Rick the Intern, titled, "We Created Rules for a Haunted House That Shouldn't Exist. Now as adults, we found a house matching its description." Part 1. The Rules. The House. We were apartment kids. No neighborhood, no ranch-style houses tucked neatly into a suburb with backyard swing sets and grill-out birthday parties. When we went trick-or-treating, it was always in someone else's neighborhood. Because of that and other reasons I'll get to, we made up a haunted house when we were kids. We gave it rules because Patrick said that rules were important for such things. It was kind of a tradition for us, and it was also something we worked at year-round. Jennifer said that haunted houses, the real ones, never slept. Back then, the four of us in our tight-knit group partially believed in that stuff, even as we drew pictures and sometimes detailed diagrams of the house's floors and added in new rules or tweaked the old ones we had. Always in Greg's sketchbooks that he kept buying under his parents' nose to feed his unfortunate habit of drawing disturbing images. Even though we made it all up, our excited, serious chatter showed how much we wanted to breathe life into it. Now we're adults. Patrick is a real estate agent. Jennifer is in pre-med at university. Greg works in advertising. And I alternate between construction and retail. It was Patrick who found the house between making his rounds as a real estate agent. I think he had been on his way to show off one of the properties he was representing when he spotted the house. He had to come back to it later when he wasn't being tailed by prospective homeowners. A 5-story Victorian with steep gabled roofs, conical tower-like extensions, and large bay windows that were all boarded up. It stuck out like a giant's rotting but elaborate sore thumb among a neighborhood of smaller houses that Patrick had been driving through to get to another neighborhood. The hedges and lawn were wildly overgrown. Kudzu and other vines clung to the house's siding. But it was something on the front porch that clinched it for Patrick. He went looking for it when he came back. To the right of the door, there were 3 large doll heads that had been slashed open and used as pots for plants. Dingy-looking things bearing fruit that was so far rotted that it resembled old shoe leather. We had never decided exactly what would be growing there. Lay propped up and dying in those makeshift doll head pots. He sent us pictures. That got us there as soon as our schedules aligned. Patrick had talked with some of his real estate colleague buddies, connections, and so on, and had gotten what he needed for permission to access the old house. So a few weeks later, there we all were, the 4 of us, standing on the lawn of a house we had sketched up and chatted about for many days as kids in our rooms while our parents had watched TV or played cards in the close confines of our apartment building.
"Well, this is something, isn't it?"
Jennifer said.
"Patrick, I know this is your doing, but wow, you went to some great lengths for this prank. I'm just going to let myself enjoy it because you put in so much effort."
Patrick shoved his hands in the pockets of his sports coat. His eyes were bloodshot. "Is it my doing?" "Yeah," I said. "This would be an extravagant prank, and for what purpose?" I waited for Patrick to answer, but he just stood there staring at the house. I was thankful that I was wearing jeans and not khaki shorts because the front lawn was nearly up to our knees.
"We should go over the rules again,"
Greg said incredibly as he was carrying a sketchbook in his hands.
"Are you insane?"
Jennifer said.
"You can't think that would matter now."
"But what if it does?" Greg said.
"What if it matters now more than it did then?"
"Unbelievable," Jennifer said. "So let's go over the rules again," Patrick said glumly, but he seemed to be trying to peer into the windows despite their being boarded up. Greg opened up the sketchbook he had been carrying. "Number 1, he said. "Wait," I said. "Is that one of your sketchbooks from when we were kids?" Greg sneered. "I wish. I think my parents found the old things and threw them away while we were moving out of the apartment. But I remembered the rules, more or less, because I read through them so often. So I wrote them down again. The language is a little different now because I'm older and, I like to think, wiser. But they should basically be the same." "We read those rules so often," Jennifer said. "Together." We all faced the house as Greg went through the rules. Here they are. 1. Never knock on the door with your fist. If you want entry to the house, place your right hand on the metal knocker and your left hand over your eyes. If someone is with you, they should be covering their eyes as well. Use the knocker 3 times. 2. Someone will open the door for you. Keep your eyes closed and covered and count to 3. You don't want to see who opened the door for you. After 3 seconds, you can open your eyes and go inside. But know that in doing so, you are entering into an agreement with the entities in the house. It is a simple agreement. You get to go inside, but they get to harm you if you break the rules. By entering the house, you're giving consent. 3. Leave any electronic devices in a cubbyhole in the wall near the front door. You can retrieve them if and when you leave. 4. Walk, but do not run. If you walk, the entities in the house will only walk. If you run, they run, and they will chase after you if you run. They have gotten very fast from chasing people over the years. 5. On each floor, you must solve a puzzle. If you fail the puzzle or flee the puzzle, the entities will come after you. Successfully solving the puzzle will grant you entry to the stairs. 6. If you go up the stairs without solving the puzzle or try to go beyond the next floor, Walt the Stairman will come after you. Walt the Stairman is an entity that spends its time devising ways to torture others with stairs. It has gotten creative over the years from people who have tried to cheat. 7. There is a treasure at the very top of the house in the attic. This is the reason why you are here now and why you are going over the rules again. This is the reason you will go inside and risk your lives. This treasure is worth the risk.
Jeez, Jennifer said. Is that how we wrote it back then?
Greg cleared his throat.
Well, basically, I like to think that my dictation is a little better now than it was back then.
He laughed, but awkwardly.
But we did include that bit about the reason you're here now going over the rules again, Jennifer said. I mean, I do remember the treasure and everything.
How could we forget about the treasure, I said, chasing it with my own nervous laughter.
What I'm saying is, Jennifer went on, seems like we almost expected ourselves to be here now. Going over the rules again? Seems like you may have fudged that part, which makes me think that Greg's in on the prank with Patrick. Bravo, boys. I'm all for it. I don't mind being on the tail end of a prank. If it's going to be entertaining, let's do it.
Wait, I said. Are we sure we want to do this? What if one of us isn't in on it? We never put much into the puzzles themselves, not the details. They could be anything.
You're going to tell me you believe in ghosts?
Jennifer said. We never explicitly said whether it was ghosts, I said. Jennifer tilted her head.
What are you trying to imply? Spirits? Aliens? Scottish house elves in the American Deep South?
Maybe, I said. Or maybe it's just something else. Greg said his sketchbooks disappeared. I just think we should be careful about this.
Guys, Greg said, and gal, don't sweat it. I've been thinking about it ahead of time. I typed up a message to send off to some friends who wouldn't call me wacko after the fact. It will send automatically in the event I'm not back to my phone and deleting it by 3 a.m. tomorrow morning. It will also send them the location of this house. I'm going to leave my phone in the car.
Well, if something happens to us before 3 or before your friends get here, I began. I wonder what the treasure could be, Patrick said, then so low I almost couldn't hear him. Tired of this rat race.
Bravo, Patrick, Jennifer said. Now lead on. It's going to get dark out here soon, and I'd rather get this show on the road while it's still light out. Or show in the house. However you want to put it. We've got puzzles to solve and we've got stairs to climb. Yeah, Pat, Greg said. Just pretend we're some folks looking to buy a nice spooky house. Do your thing.
We went up the front porch. Its old wood creaked under the collective weight of the four of us. I glanced once at the doll head pots with their dying plants and wondered how long they'd been dying. Whether or not it was all a hoax, I figured they were probably never alive to begin with. We asked each other if we were all ready, butterflies in our stomachs, hearts in our throats. Patrick planted himself at the front, put his right hand on the knocker. He nodded at us. We nodded back. And we all covered our eyes. Part 2. The First Floor. My hand shook over my shut eyes as I waited, as the four of us waited, while Patrick operated the front door's metal knocker. 1, 2, 3 knocks, just like the rules said. While we waited, I was hoping no one would come to the door, that we would all have a laugh there on the front porch as whoever was behind this house from my childhood imaginings made real would come forward at the get-go, that we wouldn't have to go inside not knowing what we would find. Maybe, I hoped, like a child making a wish with a penny at a shopping mall's fountain, it was some rich benefactor who built the house for us at Patrick's request, and had somehow made it look very old on the outside. You know, the good kind of surprise. Instead, I could hear the front door opening. My heart flipped and flopped. I thought I heard breathing, but I couldn't tell if that came from us or whoever had opened the door.
1 Mississippi,
Greg was saying out loud.
2 Mississippi.
His voice shook. While he was counting, I thought I heard something like slurred words coming from the doorway. Then it began to sound to me more like language in reverse, like when you play a movie or record backwards.
3 Mississippi. All right,
Jennifer said, hilarity or fear quaking in her voice as well.
I'm now opening my eyes.
I opened mine too. There was no one at the door. Patrick rushed in immediately. We followed. The lights were already on. A rough-looking chandelier that I vaguely recognized cast a pale yellow light over the foyer. Patrick's head was swiveling around near the entrance. He thrashed a nearby curtain, a potential hiding place.
Whoa,
Greg said. Whoever it was moved quickly.
Or maybe, Jennifer said, the door moved itself. Now, don't start thinking I'm a believer. It could be some mechanism triggered by the knocker.
Patrick, I said, you got some friends with deep pockets? I don't make many friends these days, he said. He was still looking about for whoever had opened the front door for us, checking the closet under the stairs. 3 of my only friends are here with me now, if I can still count you as friends.
Sure, Pat,
Greg said, flipping through his sketchbook, producing a pencil from his pocket, and either sketching or writing some things down. Look at this place, I said. It's just like we imagined when we were kids. I mean, it's all coming back to me now. This is the foyer. Seems to be to scale. Or close enough, I guess. Those are the stairs that curve just like we drew them. Don't step a foot on the stairs, guys, Patrick said.
Here's that little bench I remember drawing beneath the mirror,
Jennifer said. She moved over to the right.
And the mirror, its wooden frame is engraved with a bunch of snakes chasing their own tails. This was my idea. I'd forgotten about it, but you remembered? How did you get something like this?
Well, I said, if this house continues to be even somewhat remotely based on the floor plans and items we put in here as kids, things are going to get kooky.
Yeah,
Greg said. No kidding. And it had been kids back then, not architects or house decorators that had come up with this place. Kids obeying the kinds of whims and fancies that they had. The only reason we had even known about Victorian-style houses and their designs was from books we had rented from the library to help us along the way. Our primary goal had been to create a scary, dangerous house. That reminded me of something important. We made some traps, I said. Remember? At length, the other 3 said they did. I can't remember all of them, Patrick said. Neither can I, Greg said. We'll help each other, I said.
Together, Jennifer said. We can remember a lot more.
I'm still amazed that none of us went right back out the door or even talked about doing so. We hadn't started any of the puzzles yet. We hadn't risked our lives yet like the rules said we would by entering. But the threat was there and had begun to magnify as soon as that front door had opened and we'd gone inside. We should have been better prepared. I had no holy water, salt, or silver on me. Not that I think it would have mattered, not that I or my 3 friends believed that kind of stuff anymore. But maybe we wanted to believe in that stuff again.
"Guys," Patrick said, "cubbyhole."
It was there to the left of the front door, almost camouflaged with the chip white paint of the walls. It was surprisingly large enough to accommodate quite a few things. 3 of us put our phones in the cubbyhole, Greg having left his in the car.
"Nobody has any fancy spirit detecting equipment, right?"
Greg said.
"No infrared thingamabobs or anything like that, right? If so, please deposit them in the cubbyhole now." "I seem to have left my proton pack at home,"
Jennifer said, giving him a wink when I looked at her.
"So just cell phones,"
Greg said after we finished.
"Glad we came prepared,"
he joked.
"Heck, I didn't even think to bring a flashlight."
"I checked ahead of time," Patrick said. "Electricity is running to this place. I didn't go inside until now, but I had an idea the lights might be operational."
"Who's paying the electricity bill, Pat?"
Greg said. "I don't know. Wasn't able to find that out." Patrick was already moving beyond the foyer. We followed. We were all still joshing around at this point. Well, except for Patrick, but you could tell our nerves were all on fire with fear. No entities yet to speak of, unless they were invisible. I wasn't sure whether which would be scarier, being able to see them or not being able to see them. We moved about the first floor. The foyer passed by the stairs. Next was the parlor, an old-timey and foreign word to us when we were kids, but one that Jennifer had explained to us back then was like a living room for entertaining guests. It had a more formal air than a family's personal living room, so we had done our best to draw in fancy chairs and cabinets and lights in that room. And there they were. The furnishings were rough despite trying to be fancy. High-backed plush chairs with faded gilding, the cushions falling apart. One large cabinet flared out at the top into a clown's visage, etched in wood. I looked to the right wall of the parlor, noticed the painting on the wall that was a hybrid of Mona Lisa and George Washington, slapdash together with a heavy dose of Salvador Dali melting clock vibes. Only this time, it was the flesh on the face that appeared to be melting off the skull. Greg's doing. It looked good, almost professional. Had Greg been that good of an artist back then? The eyes were hollowed out, all the way into the wall it sat upon. It was the classic haunted house portrait with its eyes hollowed out so someone behind the wall could get a good look at you deal. If there's a technical term for that, I don't know what it is, but I watched the hollowed out eyes closely. Jennifer came up beside me suddenly and I think I may have jumped.
"That's Greg for you,"
she said. We went beyond the parlor and into the dining room, past into the kitchen, and at that point, we were looping back around towards the living room that was connected by a way of hallway back to the foyer and stairs. There was a lot of creepy stuff scattered about. Blood-stained cups in an old china cabinet, dolls that had what were like medical fake human eyes to replace an eye that had been lost, sitting on couches, dishes in the sink that seemed to be covered in bile in mysterious chunks and actually smelled, so bad we were gagging. I don't know about the others, but my biggest scare, at least until we got to the living room, was that nasty thing coming out of the cuckoo clock. Wish I would have forgotten about devising that when we were kids. Probably something Greg had cooked up in that sick little brain of his. It was an alcove in the kitchen above the side table. It leapt out towards me from a crooked, broken little house with a clock on its front. A figurine of a man who was old and disfigured. It was unclear whether he was still alive. His formal but tattered coat flared out behind him in the place of wings. Instead of saying, "Cuckoo, cuckoo," it said, "Leave, leave," in a strange voice. It was the kind of voice that imitated a human's but was in no way human. By this point, we were all getting a little angry. You could tell in our postures and the way our voices began to sound when we made little observations. If one of us was behind all this, it was already too much. already too far. Then we got to the living room, the last room before the foyer and stairs began, the family's personal space. Traditionally, at least by my understanding, when it came to older houses, it was not the best place for guests. It was there we knew that the first puzzle was supposed to be. Curiously, we hadn't really tried to create the puzzles back then when we were kids, even though we were all intrigued by puzzles. I wondered if, even back then, we had hoped in a dark part of ourselves that someday we might encounter this house in the flesh. Maybe we didn't want to make the actual puzzles back then because we didn't want to know their solutions yet. I wish we had. I wish we knew all the answers before it really began. The living room furnishings were the most ordinary of the rooms we've encountered, and yet in the fireplace. The puzzle. That was the area we had designated for the first puzzle. I remember circling many times around that fireplace and jotting it in myself. First floor puzzle. It almost glowed. Probably it did glow. We drew closer to the fireplace. Instead of a fire in the open firebox, there were heaps of gold coins, amber topases, green emeralds, red rubies, and ominous-looking jewelry. I noticed a pendant of a spiky winged owl or bat with twinkling eyes.
"What is?" Jennifer said. "Why is the treasure here? It should be upstairs, at the very end, in the attic."
"We don't know what the treasure in the attic is," I said, "and we don't know what that is."
"There are blocks of stone missing from the fireplace mantel," Greg observed.
Sure enough, there were. Going from left to right, starting from the bottom of the mantel, the first, second, third, 8th, and 13th block were missing, up to the point where the mantel ended and the rest of the masonry began. There were large blocks of rough-hewn stone, like for something constructed in medieval or pre-medieval times. We searched the room for potential clues to the puzzle. A mildewy chaise lounge with golden buttons and a battered couch and armchairs arranged in a loose circle. A side table with an ancient ratty-looking earth globe sitting on top of it, but the globe was caved in to the northeast, Alaska and much of the North Pole lost to a makeshift crater. There was a seashell beside the imperfect globe. An old desk that looked like it had been crafted in the 19th century sitting against the wall. On the desk was an empty off-white envelope and a compass, not the kind of compass for telling which direction you were going in, but the tool with a metal point, hinges, and a pencil that people draw circles with. The drawers in the desk were empty. And the missing blocks in the fireplace mantel mentioned earlier, the first, second, 3rd, 8th, and 13th from the left to right, starting from the bottom of the mantel. The other furnishings and odds and ends, like everything else outside of what was in the fireplace, where the puzzle would be. We had come up with these things as kids. While we're looking over what we thought must be clues, Greg suggested that maybe, just maybe, we had been unconsciously trying to create and solve a puzzle even back then. I do vaguely remember us having left some blocks out of the mantel. Bizarre, almost random little details for kids to come up with. Underneath the chaise lounge chair, Patrick found the blocks of stone that were missing from the mantel.
"What do you think, folks?"
Greg said. "Do they go back in the mantel?"
"It can't be that easy," Jennifer said.
At the time, things began to take a drastic turn. Up until then, it had just been the inanimate trappings of the haunted house in there with us. I'd almost forgotten that there might be someone or something else there too. The entities. I don't know exactly how to put this. It was like the air on the edges of the room began to blur or haze up. I can only imagine what was going through Jennifer, Greg, and Patrick's minds, but as for me, I was hoping it was some kind of smoke effect. There were shapes in the haze. Already I could tell they were bigger than us, and they moved strangely in a different rhythm to our walking or shuffling, like there was a weird and elaborate jerk to the right or left between stepping, almost dance-like. Other than that, they seemed to be clothed from head to foot in a fuzzy white material that seemed to have a hint of other colors to it, but I couldn't determine what the other colors were. As they moved towards us slowly from the edges of the room, I pointed at them and shouted as if trying to shout over the smoke or haze that half obscured them. "Did we come up with them?" I shouted. "Did we ever plan out the entities themselves?" "I don't know," Patrick said, his voice firm but much lower than mine. I saw that he had his hand on something in his pocket. I made a mental note to myself that we should probably play What's in My Pockets if we made it to the next floor. Jennifer rubbed the back of her head as if she'd been hit there. Greg was transfixed by the approaching figures, his mouth slack and his eyes glazed over. "We gotta do something," I said, "and quick." "Whatever we do," Patrick said, "we can't run. Remember the rules. They can run if we run." "Solving the puzzle wasn't supposed to be timed," I yelled. I wasn't sure whether I was yelling at those in the haze coming towards us or my friends. It wasn't in the rules. "We changed the rules," Greg said. "We added some, but it's easy to forget. We took out some things too. The 7 we have, the finished product, there are some things that were cut." I cast my sights about the living room, between the clues we had, if they were clues, my friends, and the entities approaching us. I was noticing more details about the entities, like how each seemed to be wearing a mask. They had to be masks. There was no way. Even at the slow rate they were moving, I judged they might be within reaching distance by the time a couple of minutes had passed. There were 7 of them. I ripped my focus from them. It was hard because my mind was struggling to fit them into the context of reality. My fight or flight was confused and berserk. I wanted this to all be a joke, but my instincts said threat. We were fumbling with blocks. "Which ones do we put in?" I said. My heart roared like the fire that in an ordinary house might have been in the firebox of the fireplace instead of a treasure. When I glanced at that treasure again, Patrick must have noticed because he said, "The treasure's a temptation." It was almost a chant. I didn't know if he was talking about the one in the attic or the one in the fireplace before us, but I knew one thing: they were coming. Part 3. The first puzzle solution and the real reason for risking our lives. At the edges of the living room, they were coming. They jerked left or right between stepping slowly but inevitably towards us. About half a dozen tall, weird, white-clad figures ripped from someone else's nightmare. We don't remember designing them, and plopped down in our childhood haunted house made real. The entities were coming for us, and we hadn't even gotten much of a start on the first puzzle. I felt betrayed by the house, betrayed by the rules. We hadn't broken any. At least, I didn't think we had. While the rest of us were fumbling with the stone blocks, making half-formed guesses about which blocks to put back into the fireplace mantle, Jennifer started to pull one out. We stopped what we were doing and gaped. "It was almost right," she said as she removed the 5th block. "The circle and globe clues tried to throw me off, but then I thought about how they were broken and how one of my teachers used to say spirals were like broken circles. That teacher wasn't right. Certain spirals are perfect. I used to draw spirals all the time with my compass. I'd put them on my parents' old envelopes, anything I could get my hands on, even the pages of Greg's sketchbooks. They appear in nature in things like seashells and flowers and the best kinds of spiral, the most perfect kind. It's one of the reasons I got interested in science early on. The perfect spiral is golden, called the golden spiral when someone tries to reproduce it, golden like a treasure. In mathematics, this kind of spiral can be represented in something called the Fibonacci sequence. The 1st, 2nd, 3rd, 8th, and 13th, and now 5th. That was the missing number. Makes up the beginning of the sequence, not counting 0 and the repeated numbers. As she was talking, something in the fireplace clicked. Then there was a stony sliding sound. The bottom of the firebox fell out, and the treasure, gold coins, rubies, topazes, and everything plummeted. Its echoing clatter rose up a moment later. She dropped the 5th block of stone on the floor where the others had been deposited by us. "Great," I said, "but they're still coming." The entity nearest me was about 9 feet away by now. It continued walking very slowly in its almost rhythmic stride, broken by the jerk to the left or right. And because it was this close, and even though it was still blurred by the haze that followed them like their own private atmosphere, I can tell that its legs were not like ours. They were angled in and then angled sharply out. Maybe that's why it walked the funny way it did. The rest of its body was very large and equally strange in arrangement. Over its body were thick, fuzzy, somewhere between wool and fur garments of white, almost like robes with extra colors I couldn't pin down. As for its face or head that I started to lose hope was just elaborately masked. It was like its own organism. As it got closer to me, that face thing stood up. Actually stood up from a curled position. Other than two round eyes with no irises, it was like the face thing had been sleeping on the mound of body we might normally call a neck. As it got up, it revealed its own brighter torso and face. The round eyes never shifted while the rest of it did. The face thing's lower legs were fused to the larger body. Layers of sickly but tightly packed muscles were on the face thing. When the arms on the face thing raised and turned over, I saw rows of jagged teeth on them. The larger limbs of its larger body began to raise themselves too as it got closer to me. Hands, but wider and rounder, opened with more than 5 fingers. Like it was 2 organisms, maybe more beneath the robes. "No!" Greg shouted. I turned and beheld Greg speed walking into Patrick. Patrick had a handgun, probably I thought what he had been gripping in his pocket, and it was aimed at one of the entities. The gun fired, but it missed its mark as Greg pushed Patrick over. When Greg got back up, he had the weapon, and the already queasy feeling in my stomach intensified. Then Greg walked more quickly than I thought him capable of, twisting between 2 entities, the gun in one hand and his newer sketchbook in the other, just missing getting snagged by a larger strange arm, and continued on towards the back of the room. The entities were on his tail. They had turned from us. They picked up their pace as they pursued Greg, but they weren't running like the rules warned they would if we did. Not yet. It seemed speed walking was fair game. Greg opened the door to the hallway leading back to the foyer and stairs. "I'll toss it in the cubbyhole," Greg yelled as he walked rapidly out of the room. "If that doesn't do it, and I don't make it, tell my wife and my daughter." At that moment, he had decided to slam the door behind him. Did the entities open the door like you or I would? If so, I did not hear or see it. I saw the haze around them thicken, blurred to the point that they were fully obscured. Then they were gone. "It wasn't electric," Patrick growled beside me. "The gun, it's mechanical, not electric. No violation of rule number 3. "You don't have a laser or flashlight or anything on it, do you?" I said. "No. It's a standard semi-automatic handgun with no extra bells or whistles." "How about a GPS tracker?" Jennifer said. "Ah," Patrick said. I could see his jaw grinding back and forth. "Oh yeah, I forgot I had one attached. Somebody at the store recommended it. Clerk yammered on about getting it ringed up for me and I was trying to get out of there. The thing is inconspicuous. I guess that's the point, so a would-be thief doesn't see it." He told us he was sorry, that he brought that gun to protect us, that he didn't know why Greg would not let him shoot one of those entities. "What if," I said, and bear with me here, what if those entities are just people in costumes with animatronics or puppetry? Expensive, sure, and surrounded by some impressive smoke and mirror stuff. And imagine, if you would, that Greg's the one who set it up. Like, maybe he's the one with some rich connections and doesn't want us to kill an actual person while they're just attempting nothing more than a prank. "Not long ago," Patrick said, "you were all accusing me of arranging this, which is crazy. We did this together." "Guess it doesn't matter," I said. "We gotta leave. Things are way out of hand." "We can't leave without trying," Jennifer said to me. "You know that. I think about a treasure that's worth risking our lives for." She was right. She was absolutely right. 5 floors, 5 of us, not 4. 5. We had not talked about Sally aloud since we'd gotten here, but she was on our minds. The only reason I haven't mentioned her yet was because I was waiting for the right moment. It had been Sally's idea to design this haunted house when we were young. I mentioned earlier that our main goal in making up this place and its rules when we were kids was to design a scary, dangerous house, and that it was due to our being cooped up apartment brats wanting to conjure up a house all our own. That's how it started. But then, somewhere along the way, our friend Sally, who had helped us start designing the house, disappeared. Some had said she'd been abducted, others that she just had wandered out of the apartment complex and gotten lost. There were extensive searches. There were countless vigils. We believed then, because of something we had done, that it was the house that had taken her, so as kids, we'd finish planning out the house and its rules after she was gone, because we wanted her back. We never openly said aloud that we thought finishing this idea that had started with her would bring her back, but it was there with us in the place that Sally used to sit. When she didn't come back, there was unspoken guilt. We tried again and again to fix the house and its rules. We made changes. We did everything short of building the house ourselves, which we might have done if we only had the resources. But we were kids. We gave up, because we didn't think there was anything else we could do. Jennifer still calls Sally's parents every year. I don't. I don't think I ever did. When someone goes away and you can't wrap your head around it, eventually you might start to forget. Not forget them, but forget their reality. You live with the memory of them like it's a story your parents used to read to you before bed. Sally's the treasure in the attic, I said.
Yeah,
Jennifer said.
If this isn't fake, so we should go through with it either way.
That's what Sally would have wanted, I said. She loved this stuff, probably more than Greg and the rest of us. Patrick was turned away facing one of the boarded-up windows. I wanted to turn him around and ask him point-blank which treasure he would prefer, our lost friend or one like the gold and jewels that had just been under our noses. I also didn't want to ask him. Not long after that, Greg returned to the living room. He made some joke about how folks like to jazz up their guns with electronics nowadays. He'd banked on that as soon as he seen Patrick pull his weapon like the po-po on a perp. He clapped a hand on Jennifer's back and congratulated her for solving the puzzle, his other hand still gripping his sketchbook. Despite looking a little green in the face, he seemed alright, like those entities hadn't gotten their weird little and weird big hands on him while he'd been depositing Patrick's gun in the cubbyhole near the entrance. He asked us why we were so downtrodden after solving the first puzzle. Patrick gave him an earful about knocking him over, said he owed him one. When we said we had been talking about Sally, Greg looked more shaken than I'd seen him since we had entered the house. Sally's disappearance has always affected him, actually. Maybe even more than the rest of us. We talked about how things would only get harder and crazier, as if we had known when we were designing it as kids that we'd get this chance and that it took that much to get our friend back. Then we went over to the stairs and prepared ourselves for the second floor. Part 4. The second floor. We were on the stairs, going up. The curvature of the stairs reminded me of the curled up head of the entity I'd seen up close downstairs. A head had uncurled itself as a body would then stand up on a larger body walking beneath it. I couldn't get my own head around those entities that had come out on the first floor while we had been trying to solve the first puzzle. They'd come for us because Patrick had broken house rule number 3 about depositing electronics in the cubbyhole near the entrance. The entity's appearance had been difficult for me to navigate mentally. I'm afraid that difficulty has influenced how I try to put words to them. How do you describe something that has little relation to things you've seen before? Without the powers of comparison that we ordinarily have, I feel lost. If one of the 4 or 5 of us had designed these entities, I didn't know where the idea had come from. Maybe they'd been born from some of Greg's bizarre little doodles, and maybe he'd been running a high fever then. Maybe we'd forgotten about those particular details. To try this again, what I'd seen was at least 2 separate things, separate entities maybe, fused together. A body and a face or head was its own body with its own limbs. They were clothed in whitish fuzzy robes. Well, the larger lower body was. The limbs of the larger body in particular were off, angled like a toy whose arms and legs had been snatched out by a child and then put back in the wrong way. And then there was that walking they had that was rhythmic but broken, a staccato little dance step walk that got under your skin, like a bad waltz, like strange toes stomping on your feet. Waltzes and the entities pulled me over into a lane of thinking I was trying to avoid while on the stairs. Walt. I don't see Walt the Stairman, I said. That's a relief.
The entities will probably only appear when we've been bad, Jennifer said. When we break a rule, as long as...
Cue Walt the Stairman. The rest of what Jennifer said was lost to the napalm of fear in my brain. I glimpsed an image of a large shape above the stairs hanging there. It had much longer limbs than I thought those other entities had. Its limbs were touching the walls, holding it up. It made an arc above our heads, rounder eyes than was normal looked down upon me, a hint of blur at its edges. Then it was gone. You guys see that? I said. My breath was coming out ragged. I was sure that at any moment I might throw up. Didn't want to do it on the stairs because that might add an unnecessary slipping hazard. Save that for later. We were at the second floor landing by then, so we stopped to discuss it. They told me they hadn't seen the entity dangling above us, Walt the Stairman, the entity whose job, according to the rules we made when children, was to watch over the stairs so that people didn't go up before solving the floor puzzle. Was Walt making a point, or was what I'd seen been a trick of my mind? Was it both? But the longer we were at the second floor landing, the more we knew we had to get started. Not on the puzzle. That would come later, but too soon for comfort. First, we had to face what we knew would be a potentially dangerous floor. As kids, we designed the first floor as a warm-up, scary but not dangerous. At least not until you go to that puzzle. Unless you tried to solve the first puzzle or broke one of the rules, you wouldn't be risking anything down there. Not so with the second floor. I was the one who stepped first on the second floor vestibule. Click. Onto a pressure plate. Shoot, I said. The traps. A hand grabbed my shoulder from behind me. It's all right, Greg said. That's just to get whoever's going through the house ready for the other traps, remember? I do, Jennifer said. The first trap we made comes after this. Okay, I said. Sure, I recall it, but it's a little hazy. To my right, motion. There was an old record player on a stand against the wall, just like we had put into our sketchbook designs years ago. It had a big gaudy horn on it. It's the kind of record player that I believe is called a phonograph. The record was spinning. Its needle apparatus was moving. When the needle dropped onto the record, it played as a 1910s or 1920s ragtime number. At that point, the needle rose and fell again. Too hard, I thought. The song went in reverse. I was reminded of that sound I heard at the front doorway before going into the house, with our eyes closed and our hands covering them, as the rules had instructed, when we'd been waiting for whatever had opened the door for us to move away. When the song began playing again, the voice was a much deeper, almost demonic tone. It got garbled, went into some lines about melody, and then stopped playing altogether. By that time, I had moved well off that pressure plate, and the others were standing with me in the vestibule. My heart was hammering in my chest. It's not the same song, I said. It's not the one we decided should be played when someone steps on that plate. Yeah, Jennifer said. Which is kind of ironic considering the lyrics. I don't remember what the other song was, Patrick said. It was old, too. Something about a person driving someone else crazy. I don't remember it either, Greg said. But it wasn't this, Patrick said. The vestibule also had paintings of flowers in various states of decay. That was right. That was the way it should be. The way we had intended. What was also right were the two doors at the end of the little entry hall to the second floor. We walked over to them, a door with a hook, and a door with a fish on their fronts.
"And here's the first trap," Jennifer said. "It's the... Which door is it again?"
"This is me," Patrick said. "We're the fish, so we'll go through the fish door. I remember it because it was my idea."
"No,"
Greg said, as we were moving in that direction.
"It's the hook. We changed that, remember? In order to beat this house, you have to be a hook, not a fish."
I took a deep breath. "Are you sure, Greg?"
"No, I'm right,"
Patrick said.
"I'm sure. We didn't change that. That was mine. I would know."
Greg and Patrick were having a staring contest. "We're the fish," Patrick said to him. Greg shook his head.
"You better be sure than I am. I don't think you are."
I was already moving towards the door with the fish on it. I kind of just wanted to end their argument. Besides that, I had a plan. I'd just have to have the others stand far back and hide myself behind into the side of the door as I pulled it open, thus evading the trap if it was the wrong door. So I grabbed the handle of Patrick's fish door. "All right, everybody," I said. "Stand back. Get closer to the stairs. I'll just move aside and backwards as I open the door." After they reluctantly moved away, I yanked open Patrick's fish door. I got to the side as I said I would, and I braced myself. Nothing happened. "Are we good?" I said. I was relying on my friend's better vantage point into the doorway from farther back. The others gave me the all clear. So I went around the side of the door, peered into the next room myself. It was a second-story drawing room for entertaining guests, just as we'd planned. Then I turned around to face them. "Success," I said. Greg was nearly on top of me already with that speed walk of his. He raised an arm, and I was sure I was going to get slugged, but not sure why. Instead, he grabbed the front of my shirt and pulled me back. The twang of a large spring and a whoosh of air chased after me. Then I was on the ground, scooting away on my backside as shards of filthy glass fell into my jeans. Standing above me was a mannequin dressed like a butler. "Refreshments," it said in a recorded voice. It was carrying a full tray of grimy shards of glass. If I hadn't gotten out of the way, some of them might have cut me up. We planned on that butler coming out of the wrong door to the drawing room. It was a spring-loaded mannequin bearing painful and potentially devastating little threats for the unfortunate person who opened the wrong door. I had opened that door. "Thanks, Greg," I said. I shook pieces of glass off of me as I stood up. I really owe you one. I couldn't meet Patrick's eyes. Didn't know what to say to him. I felt bad for him. I was just appreciative that I wasn't having to worry about bleeding or infection. "That thing must have come around the corner," I said. "Did we intend it that way?" No one answered the question, but they were happy I was all right. We passed into the drawing room and from there a study. There were some plenty unsettling things in those rooms. I don't know how we devised a lot of that stuff as kids. Where it came from. Keeping with the mannequin theme, in both the drawing room and study were a bunch of mannequins seated and standing in a variety of postures. Some were missing their limbs or their heads. One held another's head in its hands. A mannequin seated at the table had a book open to pages detailing an Iron Maiden, the Iron Maiden's chest cavity open and displaying its rib-like spikes, and another torture device that swung people while they were upside down. I recalled those being foreshadowing for future traps. Like I said, not sure where we'd gotten a lot of those concepts as kids. Then we were at the library. We had an idea of what to expect. Sometimes, ideas aren't nearly enough to get you ready. Jennifer opened the door, and we all peeked in. We started to hold the wall. A couple of us were gripping the door like it was a branch on a cliffside. Even though we felt we were on level ground, a moment earlier, once that door was open, our perspective changed. The wooden door of the library sloped down at a very sharp angle. Beyond, towards the back of the room, there was a pit. It looked to be roughly 10 feet in depth, with a width that went across the entire room. Against the back walls, massive bookshelves leaned over the pit, secured in place by things that even with my experience in industrial and commercial building construction, I had no idea could exist. Unless they had been made of metal and welded in place or secured with hidden bracing. In other words, Those bookshelves and their books should have fallen into that pit. They were that big. It didn't make sense how tall the room was and how deep the pit seemed to be. The library should have been directly over the kitchen and some of the other first-floor rooms, which had no indication of a pit. But we had designed this library that way as kids, so here it was. Slapping us in the face metaphorically was this fictitious banner we'd made to stretch across much of the room. It was the kind of banner you might see presenting a library's book fair. We used to love book fairs, when the library got brand new books just released, and you had the nice smelling catalogs to get you ready for when the day or days come and you could go into the library and pick up the cool new books you ordered. Anyway, instead of book fair, the banner read, "Knowledge is slippery." We'd laugh about it then, though we were clever. Didn't feel that way now. I mentioned earlier that we should have been better prepared. File that under the understatement category. We had no mountain climbing gear with us, which is probably what we needed to get across the steeply sloped flooring of the library and to the door on the right side of the room. Here's what we did do to get across the library. We held hands and we lowered ourselves on the angled floor like we made a rope of ourselves. Greg had to shove his new sketchbook beneath his pants belt. The person or people at the front looked for things against or near the front wall of the library to grasp with their free hand. Those at the back held onto what they already found. We used our leg strength and the bond of our hands. We used niches or grooves in the floorboard, baseboards that tried to break off in our grip, a desk that was heavy, but not so heavy it didn't slide a little if pulled too much. We used trust. It was hard. I think it would have been easier with 5 people, with Sally, but the 4 of us made it across from the left to the right side of the room. The pit had been dark, whispering promises, things to come, but we hadn't fallen in. After the library, we were looping back around towards the stairs. We knew that this time we'd have to solve a puzzle before a path would open back up to the stairway. If we wanted to go back, it would have had to have been back through the library. A hall from the library bisected 3 rooms, or chambers as we labeled them. They were identical in size, so we couldn't remember which one had the puzzle. We opened the doors to the first 2, even though we figured the puzzle was probably in the last one. The sights in those first 2 rooms were revolting. Bones littered on the floor of the first one, what looked to be real animal bones, or at least very good replicas. In the next room, the same exact bones were in the same exact positions. We checked multiple times, despite some of us gagging at the sight and smell of the second room in particular. But they had more meat on them, like time had been wound back. Flies were buzzing around the bones with meat on them, actual living flies. I knew they were alive because I swatted one to make sure it wasn't some special effect. I beheld its twitching, crumpled body in my palm. This was important. Flies might seem like a small detail, but other than the entities, this was the first time we'd encountered something in the house that might actually be alive. It would not be the last. In the final room of the hallway, we expected the second floor puzzle. Inside, in the middle of the room, was a circular staircase leading up. There was a trap door above it. "Huh?" Patrick said. "This isn't right," I said. "There are no other stairs in the house. There shouldn't be." "We can't go up these stairs either until we've solved the puzzle," Patrick said. "Rule number 6. Walt the Stairman will come for us if we climb the stairs before solving the puzzle." "Guys," Jennifer said, "this is the puzzle. We don't remember another staircase being in the house because we didn't put one in. But we also never decided on what the puzzles should be. They could be anything, including the staircase." "That's right," Greg said. "The puzzle was supposed to be in the center of one of these rooms, and voila, the center of the room." "We should brainstorm a little here," Jennifer said, "since we've got time." She glanced up at the clocks against the walls. You could hear them ticking in unison like the marching of an army. There had to be at least a dozen of them, looked to be half on one wall and half on the opposite. They were all plain white plastic analog clocks. "The first floor puzzle," she said, "was related to me. There were 5 of us. 5 floors, 5 puzzles. I'm guessing that each puzzle is related to one of us. So the question burning in the front and back of my mind is, who here has a thing for stairs?"
Other than Walt? Greg said, laughing harshly. We gave him sour looks. I used to like those, Patrick began. What are they called? Impossible staircases? You know, the ones that are represented in art and seem to go on forever. It's like they descend and go around, and then they're ascending back to where they begin. They're called Penrose stairs, Greg said. His arms were folded and he was sitting on the only bed in the room. What? I consider myself something of un artiste, you know, before I lost my innocence to working on medical cream and potato chip advertisements. So right now, I said, what we have is possible stairs. Maybe we gotta turn them into impossible stairs. Let's do that, Jennifer said, until we come up with something better. Greg looked up, still sitting on the bed. Hey, sounds good to me. Unless we fail because it's the wrong way to go about it. Or maybe it's right. I don't know. Guess we're on our way to finding out. All right, Patrick said. Sounds like a decent start. Make the possible stairs impossible. Wish we had an axe or a hammer in here. Yeah, I said. We could go to work on these stairs. We searched the room for other potential clues on the second floor puzzle. There wasn't much in the room, but we had to be thorough. Here are all the clues we gathered. An early 20th or 19th century looking circular staircase in the middle of the room. It went up to a closed trap door. The staircase had 14 total stairs. A bed with plain white sheets and a comforter. There was a shoe print on the left and right pillow going in opposite directions. A compact extension ladder under the bed that upon fully opening could reach the top step of the staircase. 14 clocks, analog clocks with the hands. 7 were on the left wall and 7 were on the right wall. Upon closer inspection, they seemed to be scuffed up as if someone had stepped on them. But the strangest thing was that the clocks on the right wall were actually running counterclockwise. That was it. Once again, I found myself amazed that as children, we had come up with clues for a puzzle that years ago we had seemed to have no inkling of. And now, here we were trying to solve it with those clues years later. At this point, we didn't have the entities moving towards us because we hadn't broken a rule, not like with the first floor puzzle. However, I think we all felt the pressure of time on our shoulders. Oppressive. Maybe it was the ticking of all those clocks, or how the stairs at the center of the room beckoned to us. Part 5. The second puzzle's solution. We had been discussing the clues in the room with the second floor puzzle for a while. The clocks, the pillows with the shoe prints on them, the ladder, and the circular stairway itself. A couple of times we even wandered back to the rooms with the bones and the meteor bones in them, and the flies. Did we do it for inspiration? To remind us that we also had bones that might look like that in the future? You know, I said at one point when they were all in the puzzle room, I was wrong. We already have impossible stairs in front of us. They're not Penrose stairs, but they're just as impossible because we can't climb them. Rule number 6 forbids going up the stairs without solving the floor puzzle. Patrick is right. I don't think we should even try it. Then we fold? Greg said. We just give up? That's not what I meant, I said. Maybe we're not supposed to climb them, Patrick said. If we take the clocks off the wall and put them on the stairs, one on each stair because there are 14 of each, maybe just placing them there completes the puzzle. I believe we are meant to climb them, Jennifer said. That might be what the scuff marks on the clocks and the shoe prints on the pillows are telling us. But Patrick, I think you're onto something. Because if we put the clocks on the stairs, there are 14 stairs and 14 clocks. And then we walk on them. We wouldn't be violating rule number 6. We'd still be going up the stairs though, I said. Would we? Jennifer said. Or would we be going up the clocks? Ugh, Patrick said, when he ran a hand through his hair and looked like he might pull some out. Semantics. But the more we talked about it, the more it made sense to us. There were still 2 other clues, the 7 clocks running in reverse and the ladder that we weren't factoring in. But we figured they all related to that solution without us realizing it. Jennifer had pointed out that for one of the clues for the puzzles downstairs, the 19th century desk, she'd only thought about its connection after the fact.
That desk had been made in the same century as the Fibonacci sequence had been coined. So we decided, and we started putting clocks down on stairs. We even used the ladder, even though someone could have just put those clocks down as they went along while being handed the clocks up from below. But maybe that was what the ladder was for, so we could put the clocks there ahead of time. Time. It was ever on our minds, and the march of 14 clocks ticking in unison from the walls to the stairs wasn't much help. Jennifer volunteered to walk up on those clocks because she was the lightest and said she had a decent enough balance. She said she'd been pretty darn good on the balance beam once upon a time. I think Patrick, or I in particular, might have slid off the flimsy-looking clock face coverings if we didn't break them. They were light plastic, circular, and easy enough to take off the walls. We placed each of the normal clocks on each of the first 7 stairs, and then we put the strange counterclockwise running clocks on the last 7 stairs. Our reasoning was that time had to run forward before it could run in reverse. Then Jennifer went up the circular staircase at the center of the room. She did it by stepping on the clock on each stair. We held our breath. We reminded her not to touch the railing with her hands. I don't envy her. A few times she wobbled and nearly grazed the railing. At the last stair, she waited a moment. I think we were all waiting for some sound or movement like when the first floor puzzle had been solved. Then she tried the trap door. No dice. It would not budge. We did hear something, though. Footsteps from down the hallway. Strange, inhuman. I'd say hoof-like, but that might be a little misleading. I remembered them from downstairs, even though I hadn't been paying much attention to what they had sounded like while approaching. There was the staccato, almost dance-like rhythm, and there was more than one set. Their movement competed with the ticking of the clocks. The entities, they were approaching from the end of the hallway. We had failed the puzzle. Jennifer's expression when she looked down from the top stair, her hand still on the trapdoor latch, reminded me of the expression on that person in Edvard Munch's The Scream. I'm not much for paintings myself. That might be Greg's domain, I suppose. But I knew that one well enough, and I knew I felt the way Jennifer looked with her eyes wide and her mouth hanging. We have to escape them, I said.
We just broke rule number 5, Greg said. It states that you must solve the floor puzzle. If you fail, the entities will come for you.
Yeah, but, Patrick said, I broke rule number 3 and we're still here.
Right, Jennifer said. We're still here.
Jennifer, Patrick said. I saw a face light up, a candle in the darkness of my dread. But the entities were approaching, seemed like they were already passing the first room. Slow, but inevitable. The strange dance rhythm was like a predator toying with its food. Patrick grabbed the compact extension ladder and set it up once more against the curving side of the stairway. Jennifer, he said, can you walk back down on the clocks and then get ready to go back up again? Can you do it again?
Sure, but
I'll explain later. No time. Trust me. For myself, as I watched, feeling rather powerless, I was already worrying about a repeat of the fish door incident. Patrick had seemed so certain about which door the trap was behind.
Leap of faith, Greg said. You'll either make a believer or a bleeder out of me, Pat.
From the ladder, Patrick got up on the last stair at the top, nearest the trap door. He waited for Jennifer to move back to the bottom of the stairway. Okay, Patrick said. Let's use the ticking of the clocks as our beat. We'll step at the same time for each second-hand tick. Each second. Together, I'll go down at exactly the same time as you go up. Then you try the trap door. Patrick, I said, I'd realizing something. You're not standing on a clock. I know, he said. I don't need to. The rules don't say anything about going downstairs before you solve the floor puzzle. They got ready. We all counted to 3 aloud as we had before entering the house. Tick. Patrick stepped down while Jennifer stepped up on a clock. Tick. Jennifer stepped up on a clock wobbling while Patrick stepped down on the next stair. Down and up at the same time. Like those shoe prints on the pillowcases facing the opposite directions. Like 2 sets of clocks moving in opposite directions. I'd been looking back and forth between them in the doorway and saw a strange hand, big and wide and with more than 5 fingers reach around the opening. Unlike the living room downstairs, this was a pretty small chamber, If they got in here with us, it might be over before it began. When Patrick had gotten to the bottom of the stairway and Jennifer was at the very top, she tried the trapdoor again. It took a moment to realize that the trapdoor had opened. When I glanced back to the doorway, that hand I'd seen was gone. Gone too were the sounds of their approach. Air rushed out of my lungs. "The thing about those impossible stairs from art," Patrick said, "what makes them a paradox, is because they ascend and descend at the same time. They appear to be going down, but then you realize you've actually been going up. Impossible."
"They're doing both?" Jennifer said. "Like time moving forward and backwards at once?"
"Like the clocks," Greg said. Then we realized that no secret passage had opened up for us going back to the main stairs. It had to be what was beyond the now open trap door. So the rest of us went up the circular staircase. We'd figured we'd be all right now, not in violation of Rule 6 because we'd solved the floor's puzzle. Above the trap door was a dark, narrow hallway. We went down that hallway. A couple of times one of us mentioned something moving in there with us, but it could have been our imaginations. We located another trap door down that passageway by noticing an outline of a thin square of light. When we opened it up, we found ourselves above the second floor vestibule near the main stairs where we had begun. We jumped down, and we got ready for the third floor. Part 6. The third floor. Up we went. This time I did my best not to think about Walt the Stairman while on the stairs. I certainly didn't speak of him. I didn't want a repeat of the earlier incident when I'd gotten a nasty glimpse of that particular entity. On the third floor antechamber, there were pairings of gears and other mechanical things. Their frames and glass coverings were an off-red hue, as if they'd been dipped in blood and then set out to dry. There was a bench you didn't want to sit on because of thin nails sticking out. Beside the bench was a flower pot. Instead of flowers, a fake arm and leg, the kind amputees might wear, jutted above the rim. This time, there was just one door, and even though that door wasn't set with a trap, I dreaded that room more than I dreaded any other room we've encountered yet. This was the room I might have had the biggest influence on. We opened the door and went inside. Dim ochre lights displayed a room full of fish tanks, small to very large. Though the water in each tank was murky, they were lit up so well that we got a good view of their contents. There weren't any fish inside them. Instead, there were metal beams and bracing gears, rubber belts, cords, and metal parts so twisted that their original purposes were unclear. There was a decapitated head of an animatronic squirrel character of a family entertainment center, some local knockoff Chuck E. Cheese type establishment that we used to go to but was now defunct. Rust and grime caked these objects. Since childhood, I've had a fear of submerged mechanical things. I didn't find out until later that there was an actual phobia for that. Submechanophobia, the fear of underwater man-made objects. This room had been an attempt to make my friends understand, to make them understand a certain fear of mine, because they had laughed at me, unable to comprehend how machines underwater could be a whole lot scarier than above it. It did not bring me any joy whatsoever to find that upon looking at the contents of this room, the design made real, my friends finally got it. I wish I hadn't been trying to prove a point back then. We knew there was a trap in there, under the floorboard, but we couldn't determine where it was. We had to step carefully. We gravitated towards the submerged head of that squirrel character animatron. His name had been Singin' Squirrel, and the family entertainment center he belonged to was called Singin' Squirrel and the Gang. As I said, a local Chuck E. Cheese knockoff that we had in our hometown and was now defunct. Why did we all go over to that particular tank? Because it had started to move. When we got closer, we could see the nose and other plastic parts of the face had started to wear away, revealing the bone and nerve-like machinery behind it. It was all swollen, as if what was inside couldn't wait to get out of that worn plastic skin. It was moving.
"What up, kids?"
It said. The animatron's voice was distorted and muffled from being submerged. When its jaws moved, bubbles went up and popped to the surface of the tarnished water. Its tank gave off a smell like rotten bologna and blood.
"Banjo Bear and Fiddler Bear were just asking about you."
Holy, Patrick was saying as he stepped beside me. The flooring beneath Patrick broke. I grabbed him and pushed. Where the wood had been weak, something we had not been able to detect, there was another open tank just below. It, too, was lit up so we could see the metal contraption down there. It was an open bear trap. It was as rusted and foul-looking as everything else in those other tanks.
It's been a long time since we've seen you.
Singing Squirrel continued in his characteristic southern drawl. He segued from that to a song, but then he got caught on the word long, repeating it over and over until it slowed down and got very deep. Like that old record player downstairs, it started to sound demonic before it faded. Singing Squirrel's mouth remained open. Speaking of the record player on the second floor in this incident, and how they had both slowed and got demonic sounding, those were details we had left out as kids. We were beginning to find that for the things we left a little vague in Greg's sketchbooks, the house would fill in the details for us, and we were not fans of the choices it was making, at least not when we had to encounter them in person. Patrick thanked me for pushing him out of the way of that tank-submerged bear trap beneath the flooring, and they comforted me, and I think themselves, about my fears of underwater machinery. The next room was the laboratory. In our designs, we decked it out with all kinds of vials and canisters of liquids, steaming vats, hoses that pump things here and there, forceps, spatulas, and other utensils, and ancient-looking machines that sparked electrical current and spit fire. What we saw in there, it seemed to be a pretty faithful representation of what we put in Greg's sketchbook all those years ago. Except, here's one reason why I just mentioned how when we left out details, the house took certain liberties to try to fill in those details. We had put a Frankenstein's monster in that room, strapped him down to a gurney. But we had only drawn in a vague shape and written the words, like Frankenstein's monster. When we got closer to that thing on the gurney, and we had to because we put it in front of the door at the end of the room, we could see all the details that the house had filled in for us. Its face and body were scorched and bloody, riddled with indentations and evidence of parts being fused on. But the kicker? It had pieces of each of us. 5 patches of face for the 5 of us, including Sally. 5 different assortments completed the patchwork of its body, but the face and body were made of the adult us. Sally's long blonde hair on the right part of its head and the right green eye of the thing gave us patches, glimpses of what Sally might look like if she were still around today. It seemed to be unliving, but when we began to pass over the patchwork creature, it came alive. It groaned. Its right hand snatched Patrick's wrist about the same time. He'd gotten too close. It was still strapped down to the gurney, but it took a lot for the 4 of us to get Patrick free. The strength of that thing, of only its right hand, was unreal. The right side of its crooked mouth frothed and drooled. Tears wet its eyes. It was all of us. It was none of us. When we left that room, I felt, and I think the others probably felt it too, that we left pieces of ourselves behind. Next was a dimly lit hallway looping us back around in the direction of the stairs. Light was focused beyond where we knew there was a pit that we had to cross. But Patrick stopped and slumped down against the wall. He sat there with his arms over his knees and his head bent low. I went over to him. "Don't think I can do this, man," Patrick said. "I think this is where I turn back." "You got us in here, buddy," I said to him. "We owe you enough for that, but we might need you for the long haul. Think about Sally." "Sally isn't the treasure," he snapped. By this time, Jennifer and Greg were next to us. "Sally's gone," Patrick said. "She's been gone for a long time, and she's not coming back. And as for the treasure, for all we know, it's some monkey's paw garbage that we're going to regret getting, if we even have a shot of getting it. I'm sorry. I'm out." "We have to try," Jennifer said. "If it's us against this house, we need everybody we can get. Bonus points if they happen to be the childhood best friends who helped design it." "That's right," Greg said. He looked like he was on the verge of a bigger breakdown than Patrick was having. He grinned through it, though, I think for Patrick's sake. "Besides, Pat, you still got some questions about the property. It wouldn't look good to your real estate pals if you left us here without answering them." Well, Patrick said. He stood up and roused himself with an ironic chuckle. Guess the only way to answer those questions is to continue. That's the spirit, I said, patting him on the back. I knew you took your job more seriously than I do.
Let's go, Jennifer said. You silly deranged kids.
Another pit was before us, but we could actually see the bottom of this one, unlike the second-floor library. I wasn't sure if that was a good thing. At its bottom were long spikes of bamboo filled with chicken excrement. How did we know what they were filled with? Well, because that's what we had written into our sketchbook designs. Filled with chicken poo. You would have had to jump 40 feet to cross that pit, but there were ropes you could swing across with. There were a bunch. They were taut, though, and fixed to stakes in the ground. You had to trigger those traps to get access to the ropes. Leg snare traps, like the ones in the movies that catch their victims or prey in a leg noose and then pull them up in the air, leaving them dangling by their feet. We had to knock over one of those stakes without getting caught in the loop of rope surrounding it. But the closer we got, the more we realized why we had put so many leg snares into our designs. To make it more dangerous, to make it harder. But trying to knock over one, you might inadvertently knock over another stake and get caught in its trap. That's what happened to me. It was no fault of mine or my friends. Before then, we had been able to use all of us to our advantage, as when we got across the library. Now, because the hallway was relatively narrow and there were so many stakes, there just wasn't enough room. We got bunched up and someone accidentally elbowed me. Out of instinct, I moved away. That's when the back of my shoe struck a wooden stake. The leg snare trap triggered and the rope tightened and brutally swung me up and over. Already I felt sick. The dim room spinning around me like I was on a poorly designed fair ride. My stomach not knowing whether to drop or to rise. My right ankle felt like it was being torn off. But even once I was upside down dangling, blood rushing to my head. That wasn't the end of it. Something clicked above me and began to swing me back and forth over the pit. It recalled the mannequins on the previous floor and how one had a book open on 2 torture devices. Here was one of those torture devices. A leg snare that not only held you upside down, but swung you back and forth. Something fell out of my jeans pocket. My pocket knife. The one I carry around all the time because I'm in construction and I live in the South and you never know when you'll need it. I needed it then, but as far as I knew, it was at least 20 feet below me in a pit of manure-filled bamboo spikes. My head was pulsing and I began to see stars. Already my hands and feet were going numb. I had a coughing fit as I swung, and I'm not sure whether it was my attempt to call out to my friends or something else. They were telling me to just hang on. Yeah, I was hanging on all right, and it hurt. They sprang another trap. A rope ripped against my face. I could taste blood. Then they sprang another trap, and another. But eventually they got it right. Not an easy feat. They had to not only spring the trap, but catch its rope before it sped over the pit and was too far out of reach. Patrick was there, right side up. He put one of the free ropes in my hands. I didn't know how I held on to it. It must have been scary for him to try to hold on to this rope above that pit while sawing at the noose around my leg with his tiny keychain pocket knife. I know it was scary for me. He got me free. I had a moment of extreme panic as I started to drop towards the bamboo spikes, but Patrick was able to help me, along with the other rope he'd put in my hands to get back upright. Then both of us used our weights to swing back and forth above the pit until we had enough momentum to cross. Once there, we threw our ropes for the others to get. Thankfully, those things were pretty substantial, so it was not difficult to get them across the pit and into Jennifer and Greg's hands. The whole ordeal was pretty rough. I feel sapped just thinking about it now. But we had to get our acts together. By we, I mean me, because that affected me the most. The puzzle room was just beyond. We opened the door to the room down the hall, which was about twice as large as the little puzzle chamber on the previous floor. We were startled by what we'd found. There was a table at the center of the room where the puzzle was supposed to be, made of what appeared to be gold. On this golden table were golden shapes that seemed to be part of the table itself, or cast in the same mold. These shapes were a circle, a triangle, a square, and a diamond. There was a heavy wooden chest in the corner of the room with a large golden lock on it. Another chest of the same kind in the opposite corner of the same room without a lock on it. A series of medieval-style woven tapestries on the walls, winding all across the room, showed 4 scenes. A lopsided battle between 2 forces, a well being poisoned, crops burning, and 2 kings at a chessboard. There were also, bizarrely enough, safety equipment hanging on a rack in another corner of the room, including a large apron and a face shield. Naturally, we investigated further, and here are all the clues we gathered. The 4 tapestries on the 4 walls. The one with the battle showed an army facing a much smaller force. The second tapestry depicted a man pouring something into a well, and the third was of crops burning. In the last tapestry, one king had just defeated the other, as shown by their chessboard and the winning king's posture. However, a group of soldiers with their swords drawn was sneaking up behind the king that has won. A heavy wooden chest in one corner of the room with a golden lock, another chest just like it but without a lock. What we judged to be a puzzle itself, a golden table with golden shapes as part of its tabletop. These shapes, a circle, a triangle, a square, and a diamond, were actually part of the tabletop, not on it, as if they had been cast from the same mold. The golden table could not be moved, no matter how much we tried to push it, suggesting it might have been secured to the floor. Increasingly, we found that the tops of the shapes unscrewed. When unscrewed, the circular open of each was about 4 inches in diameter. Inside was a pungent-smelling liquid that was very irritating, causing us to quickly screw the tops back on. Each of these golden shapes was the same height, probably about 3 feet tall, and we had judged the liquid to be about halfway to the top of each. Their other dimensions varied. We could not move the golden shapes filled with the pungent-smelling liquid, just like we could not move the table. Inside the chest without a lock, we found an old postcard with a checkerboard design and nothing else on it, a clear box made of a very durable plastic with a golden key inside it. We could neither break the box nor fit the box inside any of the unscrewed golden shapes, and 4 pieces of chalk. These pieces of chalk were in a circle, triangle, square, and star, not diamond, shape, and probably averaged about 2 to 3.5 inches in diameter. One set of protective equipment on a rack, in another corner, an apron, a face shield with a respirator, and gloves. The measurements were eyeballing at guesses. We had no tools to measure with. The whole time we were trying to find out whose puzzle this was. Well, they were all of ours, but it seemed with our past puzzles like each one was connected to one of us in particular, like with Jennifer's Fibonacci sequence or Patrick's Penrose stairs. It took me a while, but thinking about their mumbo-jumbo number sequences and paradoxes along with the clues we'd gathered in this room jogged loose a bit of mumbo-jumbo in my own brain. Parando's paradox, I said. Beg your pardon? Greg said, looking up from the notes he was taking. I used to play chess and checkers a lot, I said. Even back when we were making up this house. I haven't touched this stuff much after high school, but I do occasionally. Yeah, I was a bit of a geek. Still am and proud of it. Some other kid would throw around this fancy term called Parando's paradox, which I guess is a showy way of putting when you use a losing strategy to win a game. It gets done in games like chess and checkers. There's this old story about this Chinese general that wins horse races against his king, and he does it by starting with his slowest horse. Figures the king wants to win and will use his fastest one up front, so the king wins the first round. But in the second round, the general uses his fastest horse, while at that point the king is forced to use a slower horse than his best unless he wants to use the fatigued animal. The general wins that second match. In the final match, the general wins again because at that point, the king has used up all his fastest horses. Okay, Greg said. Interesting, but how are we going to apply that to the puzzle? Maybe we have to fail this puzzle, Jennifer said, in order to solve it. How are we supposed to do that without summoning those entities? Patrick said. Rule 5. We fail the puzzle. The entities come after us. We traded looks. For then, I had been hoping that we wouldn't see the entities on this floor, that we would solve this puzzle the first time. Maybe I'd been hoping in vain. We put our heads together and went over the clues of the 3rd floor puzzle again.